I'm 47-year-old Faith Walker, and I've become an expert at keeping my distance. However, that Tuesday afternoon in October, like a puppy on a leash, guilt pulled me through Nashville General Hospital's automated doors. My 73-year-old neighbor Henderson had passed out in her garden. The paramedic said a heart attack. Her porch light remained on, so I should have checked on her sooner rather than presuming she was okay. Each and every evening, the scent of despair and disinfection filled the waiting area. Overhead, fluorescent lights were buzzing. Families huddled in plastic chairs, staring at their phones or muttering prayers. I took a seat close to the window, the linoleum clicking against my high-end heels. Henderson family. A nurse showed up with a clipboard. I got to my feet. Her neighbor is me. Is she all right? Are you identified as her? Contact for emergencies. No, I wasn't. Naturally, I wasn't. Mrs. Henderson most likely received Christmas cards twice a year from a distant niece in Memphis. I took a seat again, feeling worthless. I'm sorry. My self-pity was cut short by a quiet voice. What are you asking? What about Mrs. Henderson? I gazed at a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, had shoulder-length brown hair, and the sort of green eyes, too brilliant for this sterile environment. She had on a cardigan and basic jeans that had seen better times. Do you know her? I inquired. My name is Callie Bell. Room 314 is where my aunt is located. Yesterday, Mrs. Henderson paid her a visit. While undergoing chemotherapy, they became buddies. She took a seat next to me. Without being invited, Mrs. Henderson brought up the owner of the downtown salon, her neighbor with the elegant blonde hair. Instinctively, I caressed my expertly styled hair. I would be that person. I'm proud of you. Claims that you took nothing and created something lovely. The remarks struck more forcefully than they ought to have. Beyond courteous waves across the fence, Mrs. Henderson hardly recognized me. I hadn't noticed since I was too busy establishing my kingdom. She has been battling with cancer. What is the duration of your aunt's illness? I inquired. 6 months. Although yesterday's surgery went smoothly, recovery is taking a while. In her lap, Callie's hands twisted. I've spent the most time here. Evenings, I occasionally get to assist other patients thanks to the staff. Kind of you. People act in this way. She stated it, only without passing judgment. Yet I sensed the criticism nevertheless. For a while, we sat in cozy stillness. Callie possessed a calmness about her as if she had discovered a way to find serenity in awkward situations. My regular restlessness was exacerbated. Feel ostentatious and superfluous. The Andersons, the same nurse came back. Callie stood. My aunt is that. She's requesting you. While Callie collected her battered handbag, I started talking. After your visit with your aunt, make sure to visit Music Rose Walker's studio. I'll correctly adjust your hair. She hesitated, a look of surprise on her face. The residence is out of my price range. Mrs. Henderson would like to see her friend in her finest light. Callie's whole face changed as she smiled. Thank you, Faith. That's really kind. I was left wondering why I had made such an offer when she vanished down the hallway. I don't volunteer, but something about Callie Bell made me feel superior to who I am. 2 hours. A doctor eventually showed up with information regarding Mrs. Henderson. Stable state, effective surgery, convalescence. Would require time. As I drove home, I thought about emerald eyes and the autumn leaves that littered Nashville's streets. Unexpected generosity. That night, my penthouse felt more empty than normal. Mrs. Henderson would be all right. That ought to have been sufficient. However, Callie Bell kept coming to me, and I wondered when I might accept that haircut. 3 days later, Callie Bell appeared to be approaching Walker as she stood outside her studio. A confessional. I had previously seen her check her reflection in the glass, twice via the floor-to-ceiling windows. Pulling the door open at last, I said, "You came," and put down my coffee. She looked around at the pricey artwork on the walls and the contemporary fixtures and said, "I almost didn't. This location is stunning. Quite scary." I took great delight in my salon. The Nashville skyline may be seen behind the chrome and white leather windows. Here, the majority of clients felt empowered. It appeared as though Callie wanted to blend in with the marble floor. Simply, I led her over to my station and said, "Hair, there is nothing to fear." She made a compromise. With stiff shoulders, into the chair. My hair has never been cut by anyone else. It was always done by the sisters at the monastery. With my hands full of styling implements, I stopped. For 8 years, you were a nun. Years, departed 6 months prior. The weight of that choice was in her voice. Continuing to learn how to function in the real world. I looked at her image in the mirror, the cardigan with no shape, hair that had been cut with kitchen scissors, and sensible shoes. However, beneath her cautious shyness, she was beautiful in a way that most women would have to spend a lifetime striving to attain. I said, "What made you leave?" As I started to divide her hair, I no longer thought God wanted me to keep myself hidden. She looked directly into the mirror. It is impossible to pray away some realities. My hands froze for a second. Her confession had a raw quality that made my chest tight. I had built fences around comparable things for 20 years. Facts. Instead, I remarked, your hair is gorgeous, healthy and thick. We'll just provide. It has some form. Callie filled me in on her aunt's recuperation and her hospital volunteer work while I was working. This approach to discussing service didn't come across as condescending or self-congratulatory. Just sincere concern for other individuals. How about you? She inquired. Aspired to be a stylist all my life. Desired to be many different things. Ended up being skilled at elevating others' appearances above my own. I gently cut around her face. After my divorce, I built this property. Had to have something that was all mine. No children. Never took place. Most likely. For the best. I ignored the familiar pain that question usually caused and concentrated on her hair. After I was done, Callie gazed in the mirror at herself. Her face was well framed by the basic cut, which highlighted her stunning green eyes and her jaw's elegant line. She muttered, I look different. You appear to be. You just need better lighting, she said, turning in the chair to look at me. The truthful response was that I had been thinking about her for 3 days. Why did you do this? You don't even know me. About how she had sat with strangers in a hospital waiting room and of her quiet strength, regarding the bravery it needs, have made the decision to leave everything she had ever known. Instead, I said, Mrs. Henderson believes you're special. And the question hovered between us like a challenge. What do you think? Callie's gaze swept across my face. Seeking, I wasn't certain I was prepared to deliver it. You seem braver to me than most of the individuals I know. Her cheeks turned red. Salons are more scary than coffee shops. Across the street is another. I looked at my calendar of appointments. It was an hour before my next client arrived. I need some coffee. We took a seat in a corner, booth at the tiny cafe, our mugs releasing steam. Callie had encircled her cup with her hands as though she warmed herself. She asked, Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Have you ever had the impression that you were following a script that was written by someone else and living someone else's life? Didn't truly know you. The inquiry likely struck a deeper chord than she had intended. My social circle, my marriage, even my achievement, it was all based on expectations that were never fully met. I acknowledged that I used to believe that emotion indicated a lack of gratitude and that I should be content with my fortunate existence. I'd been given. She sipped her coffee. Her words made me question whether my spirit was trying to communicate with me. I wanted to reach across the table and grasp her hand because of the vulnerability in her voice. But I instead held onto my own mug. Her gaze was fixed on me. Tighter. What's your soul telling you now? That some people are worth the risk of beginning over. 3 weeks after that coffee, the bustling cafe vanished. I convinced myself it was simply a pleasant talk. But I ended up asking Callie to my monthly book group. Callie said, Are you sure they'll accept me? The truth was more straightforward and terrifying. I wanted her around. They're my pals, but I'm not exactly Nashville society material. So I was adjusting the new blouse I'd helped her choose. Famous last words. They'll love you. 5 women made up my book club. We've known one another since our 20s, when we were all married and doing what we were supposed to. Diana had 3 stores. Amanda operated charity galas. Sarah was married to a guitarist who was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. And Beth oversaw a chain of high-end eateries, Diana's home in Belmead, Wine. I presented Callie as my new acquaintance, while observing their courteous evaluations, which were as free-flowing as the rumors, under the pretext of welcome. So, Callie, tell me about yourself, Amanda inquired. I used to be in religious service, she said, swirling her Chardonnay. I currently volunteer at the hospital and occasionally assist Faith at the salon. How nice, Sarah remarked with that specific smile. Southern women are excellent at finishing school. The topic of conversation shifted to more secure ground. Callie listened more than she talked about book discussions, weekend plans, midlife crisis, whose husband was having what? When she did participate, her observations were spot on. The writer's performance-related writing regarding our current option. She described femininity as women who have learned to be what other people need rather than who they are, too near to home for most of us. The room fell silent. That's pretty, Beth finally said. Insightful. It was quite intellectual. Following the meeting, I escorted Callie to her automobile. I lied. They didn't like you, but that's okay. I'm used to. They require time. Her acceptance of their subtly rejected behavior made my heart churn. How are you different from their typical circle? I nearly replied honest, but it felt too disclosing. See things clearly. Callie began assisting at my salon 3 days a week the following week. her soft hands, and as she shampooed her client's hair, she listened to them in a way that prompted them to divulge their most private secrets. Actually got better with her there, and we settled into a comfortable rhythm where she would bring us coffee and we would work. She told me that they spoke about everything and nothing during their lunch breaks after their morning visits. Regarding her upbringing in a small Tennessee town, her decision to pursue a career in religion, and the gradual discovery that she was living for everyone but herself, I revealed aspects of my marriage that I had never discussed with anybody before, that felt like wearing clothing that never quite fit, about fortifying my company against a society that demanded my contentment, about the loneliness that neither success nor pricey wine could alleviate. You're not what I anticipated when we were closing the salon one evening, Callie commented. What did you expect? Someone tougher? More brittle? I calculated the day's receipts while she arranged the styling tools. But behind it all, you're really rather soft. Armor. I glanced up from the cashier. Perhaps the issue is that softness isn't a survival trait in Nashville. It was already 8 o'clock. The studio was deserted, but for us, the city lights flickered outside the windows, and the room felt abruptly. Faith, remarked Callie, intimate without the buffer of clients and conversation. Yeah, I need to tell you something. She was standing nearby, discreetly putting down the remaining brushes, sufficient for me to detect the scent of her perfume, which was light and fresh and which she had begun wearing after leaving the convent. I think about you constantly, she muttered, her green eyes serious, almost scared. When I wake, when I'm laying in bed at night or working at the hospital, I convince myself it's just friendship. But that isn't the case. My heart paused, then began to beat rapidly. Callie, I am aware that this is complex. I am aware that you have never dated a woman. I am aware that stating this will likely wreck everything. Yet I can no longer pretend. She was correct about everything. This was risky and complex. I had a reputation to preserve, a company to safeguard, a meticulously planned life that did not involve falling for former nuns with green eyes and courageous souls. But as she moved closer, I could feel her heartbeat rising. Those rational worries didn't seem to apply to my neck. You're not ruining anything, I replied, reaching up, and she leaned into my touch, her eyes momentarily closing as I traced the line of her cheek with my thumb. And when she opened, the last of my resistance gave way, and I gave her a gentle, cautious kiss, as if she may vanish if I. She tasted like possibility, danger, and everything I'd been too scared to want. And we moved too quickly, split apart, breathing heavily, and I muttered, now what? Work things out together. Nothing changed after that initial kiss, but we still worked together during the day and continued to talk and drink coffee. But there was now a hint of electricity. I had been married to Robert for 8 years, but I had dated guys before him, so any casual contact seemed risky. I believed I knew desire, but my feelings for Callie were more profound, distinct, and terrifying than anything I'd. My confession was, I don't know how to do this, as she arranged the supplies in the back room one afternoon. Neither do I, she replied, but I'm sick of living half a life and have spent enough years concealing what I want. She had previously given up 8 years of her life to religious vows, so certainty made my concerns seem self-serving. In the meantime, we began gathering outside the salon, and we had quiet dinners in restaurants all over town because we were afraid of what people may think. We wouldn't encounter any members of my social circle. After dusk, we would take long walks in Centennial Park. This feels like an affair, I said one evening after we'd visited areas that Nashville society hadn't been to. I'm not sure what you think this is, but I've been driven 20 meters out of town just to hold hands in a movie theater. I didn't switch off the engine as I pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex. I've never concealed it. I've already lost one life. So I understand if this is too much. Callie was silent for a while. I can live with losing another. Her tone of resignation made my heart ache. She was ready to leave to shield me from my own anxieties. No, I said, at last shutting off. She said, I'm tired of being a coward. Her tiny but cozy apartment was packed with. We sat on her couch with glasses of wine, surrounded by books, plants, and the kind of unpretentious beauty that money cannot purchase. My birthday is next week, I finally remarked, after discussing everything but what we both wanted. 48. Feel like having a party with an elderly woman. She put down her glass of wine and stepped forward. You're just getting started, not old. She kissed me this time without reluctance. After weeks of great restraint, her hands entwined in my hair and drew me in closer. Are you sure? She muttered on my lips. I took her to the bedroom without responding. Callie stroked me, and making love to her was like learning a language I'd been wanting to master all my life, charting every nook and cranny with hunger and reverence, as if she were learning something valuable by heart. When I whispered to her name, she answered softly, narrowing my universe to this bed, this room, and this woman who saw past every one of my meticulously built walls. And then we lay entangled in her covers, me resting my head on her. No going back now, I said as she etched designs on my skin across my chest. Want to? With my hair strewn all over the pillow and my lips swollen from kissing. I raised my head to gaze at her. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and her eyes were warm with contentment. No, but what exactly am I afraid of? Losing everything I've worked so hard to build. People discovering out of not having the courage to pick this. She tenderly cradled my face. For years, people thought that love was selfish and that it was bad to seek things for oneself. Yet perhaps rejecting love is the actual sin. In order to escape the discomfort of the morning after, I waited until dawn and sneaked out when she was sleeping. We weren't prepared for those chats, but I couldn't get her comments out of my head. That day at the salon, I observed her job, the tactful way she spoke with people, the way she recalled specifics about their lives, the quiet competence that made everyone feel valued. She helped my business succeed there. But it wasn't the reason during our lunch break, she mentioned yesterday night and stated I wanted her to stay. Faith, I broke in. Best birthday gift I've ever received. The entire skyscraper might have been powered by her smile. However, as the week progressed, reality began to reappear. Inquiring about book club, Amanda contacted. I was invited to a charity event by Sarah. Spectacular. Diana wanted to introduce me to her brother-in-law, who is divorced. Just tell them you're seeing someone, Callie said. Recommended. I see that she was silent for a while when they asked who it was. The pain. I hated myself for the anger in her voice. This amazing woman had already given up everything for the truth once. And because I was so terrified of whispered conversations at country club meals, I was requesting that she lurk in the shadows. I said, it's not about you. It has to do with my cowardice. Yes, but that doesn't lessen the pain. I lay by myself in my king-size bed that night, staring at my pricey penthouse's ceiling, wondering what in the world I was doing. I had all I had hoped for: achievement, financial stability, and social status. But now it didn't feel real. Not in contrast to Callie's, looked at me as if I were worth picking, as if the chance of starting fresh was worthwhile. On a Tuesday, the scandal surfaced. November morning, my phone began buzzing with text messages while I was opening the salon. Sarah first Diana, then Amanda. The same surprised inquiry in all its permutations. Is it accurate? Callie had been spotted leaving my penthouse at daybreak by Rachel Martinez, my ex-business partner and purported friend, last week. Since I had purchased her portion of the salon 3 years prior, she had been resentful, saying, in the process, I had betrayed her. She had ammunition now. The midlife crisis of Faith Walker has reached new lows, distorting that unfortunate former nun who works for her with posts on social media. Some individuals have no shame. The post featured a picture of me and Callie entering my building together, taken from the other side of the street. Use a telephoto lens, I murmured. Damn. As I sank into my styling chair. After 20 minutes, Callie showed up with our typical coffee. Realizing right away that something wasn't right, I showed her the phone and said, what happened? As she read the comments that had already begun to pile up, she noticed that her face was turning pale. I had known them for years, joking crudely about nun conversion, people feigning alarm over my apparent breakdown. I'm really sorry, she whispered softly. For what purpose? Being spotted with me, for introducing this into your existence. With trembling hands, she took a seat at the coffee table. Rachel is correct about something. I have no place in your universe. Give up. Rachel is a resentful individual who has been searching for methods to harm me for years, but I was unable to stop the damage from growing. Amanda gave a call to show worry, but in reality, to get specifics, I received a text from Diana saying she was praying for me. Sarah just provided a link to a sexual confusion specialist therapist. By the afternoon, 3 customers had called off their appointments. My phone had completely ceased ringing by the evening. Callie worked through I could sense the weight of it weighing on her shoulders, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. After the final customer departed, she began to collect her belongings. Where are you heading? A place to pack. Pack? For what purpose? Her green eyes were filled with grief and resolve as she turned to face me. I'm departing Nashville. I'm going to stay in Memphis with my cousin till I decide what to do next. You're sprinting. I'm defending you, all you've worked for, including your company and reputation. Her voice cracked a little. I'm not going to be the cause of your complete loss. What if you don't want to keep me safe? Be practical. Faith, take a look at what was posted in only one day. How much time before your customers completely cease coming? How long before my pals, with a bitter laugh. These folks have been anticipating my downfall for years. They are not companions. However, I knew she was correct about the business even as I was saying it. The social elite of Nashville might be incredibly spiteful when they desired to discipline someone who had crossed the boundary. When I said, I need time to think. Of course, however, I was more afraid of Voice's finality than of losing clients or being shunned by society. She didn't show up that evening, as scheduled. We went to dinner. Rather, she took the night to reflect and sent a text instead. I'll give you a call tomorrow. I used the evening by myself in my apartment, gazing out at the glistening metropolis that I had overcome with pure willpower. Each light stood for a person who was most likely discussing me at the moment, analyzing and identifying my decisions. Lacking, my sister in Atlanta called me, and my phone buzzed. Faith, I noticed the article. Are you all right? You can rely on Emma to cut right through the clutter. We would, up in poverty but with pride. Two girls who had taken separate routes and struggled to improve their lives. She would go on to teach, raise 3 children, and married her college love. I had opted for glitz, glamour, and the continual push to seem flawless. I said, I don't know. Regarding the woman, is it accurate? Callie is her name? It's true, too. There was silence between us. Emma had never disapproved of my divorce or my brutal business methods. But this felt more significant. Are you in love with her? The question struck me like a blow to the body. I hadn't allowed myself to consider the straightforward in all the drama and damage control. Truth at the heart of it all. Indeed, then defend her. It isn't that easy. It is possible to rebuild the business. When you first built Walker Studio, how long did it take you? 5 years. You were younger and lacked experience at the time. Now you could accomplish it more quickly. You don't. Emma, comprehend. Money isn't the only factor here. This is about my whole life. A pleasant existence for yourself. I began to say, yes, automatically, but then stopped. Callie, when was the last time I'd been truly happy? When was the last time I had anticipated anything other than the next customer, the next social duty, or the next step on the ladder I had been pursuing? Decades, I said. She makes me happy. At last. So you're already aware of what you need to do? I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows after Emma hung up, looking out over Nashville. The same city that had provided me with everything I believed I want was now prepared to remove everything. Perhaps, though, that wasn't totally awful. Perhaps I had been so preoccupied with erecting barriers to keep what I had that I had lost the sense of what it was like to be alive. The scandal had teeth by Friday. Walker's workspace appeared to be an abandoned town. The phone is silent and the appointment book is empty, with the exception of local reporters and collection agencies. Nashville's newest power couple is being interviewed by entertainment blogs. I watched the street outside from my chair, calculating the number of old customers who passed my windows and crossed over. All of them was the response. 17. I informed Kelly, who had insisted on going in spite of everything, that there would be cancellations today. This weekend, I should visit Memphis, she replied softly, avoiding eye contact. Give me time to regain my composure and let others to forget. At last, she looked at me. Your business is dying. Faith, your pals refuse to talk to you. When will you stop hating me for damaging everything you constructed? The door chimed before I could respond. Diana Walsh entered with her charity board on, meeting expression, aloof but worried. Faith, sweetheart, I hoped that we may have a private conversation. Callie got to his feet instantly. The back is where I'll be. In fact, Diana sat on the edge of a chair as if she would catch a disease and added, this concerns you both. Faith, the women are concerned about you. You appear so different from this whole circumstance. In what circumstance? Being content or being truthful? Don't be careless. In this city, you've established a reputation. Individuals admired you, noted as the past tense. Diana let out a sigh. You are important to us. But your business is not the only thing being harmed by the connection. Everyone who is related to you is being impacted. How precisely? Sarah's, the label owned by your husband, is reevaluating their agreement with your corporate accounts. The charity board for Amanda is asking. Their beauty committee based on your assessment. Association is a worry for Beth's restaurant group. The danger was obvious. Watch the whole social network I've built fall apart as you stay with Callie. Not only my customers, but all those who would ever provided contacts and recommendations to boost my business. What do you want me to accomplish? Be reasonable. This lady has already cost your firm thousands of dollars. How much more are you prepared to give up for something that is clearly an experiment in midlife? Having heard enough, Callie emerged in the doorway. I'll make things simple for everybody. I'm heading out town this evening. Callie, not at all. However, she had already started to gather her bag and move. With silent dignity, they walked toward the entrance. Diana is correct on one point. This world is not where I belong. You are a part of, I remarked, trailing behind her. Do I? Because it appears to be loving from where I am. I'm too expensive. I was left alone with Diana, and the wreckage of my well-planned existence when she left. Give it time. Diana replied gently. She's doing the right thing. You'll see. Was all misunderstanding caused by the stress of your divorce? I wanted to shout that my divorce had been official for 3 years, that aside from my personal satisfaction, I had never been perplexed by anything in my life. Rather, I requested Diana to go. Callie's car wasn't there when I drove to her apartment complex that evening. She left a forwarding address in Memphis and settled her lease that afternoon, according to the landlord. I took a seat in my automobile outside her deserted building, at last realizing what it was like to be lost. Not the silent letdown of my marriage dissolving or the annoyance of business failures. This was the feeling of something tearing, important, destroyed. There was more unpleasant news on Sunday. My landlord wanted to talk about renewing the salon's lease. 3 main, my accounts had been placed on credit hold by suppliers. Due to schedule issues, even my cleaning service had canceled. I didn't realize how completely someone who disobeyed Nashville's unspoken rules could be shunned. They weren't merely stealing their company. They were ruining all of my business relationships, years of development. The worst thing, though, was Kaylee's quiet, no phone calls. No, I left a dozen messages on her voicemail, but she didn't reply to my texts. I opened the salon completely empty on Monday morning, out of habit. 2 walk-ins arrived for simple cuts, avoided eye contact, and paid in cash. By the afternoon, I was by myself, once more, surrounded by pricey machinery, and unsure of how long my money would endure. The buzzing on my phone was an unidentified Memphis number texted me. I'm secure. Don't be concerned about me. Look after yourself. You see, that was it. No expressions of regret, love, or hope for the future. Little more than the courteous worry of someone who has already gone on. I typed and removed a dozen answers. I wanted to tell her that I was going to follow her to Memphis and sell everything. I desired to claim that I would always pick her over Nashville society. I wanted to swear that tomorrow I would be more courageous than I had been. Yesterday, rather, I responded with the cowardly, "Glad you're safe." I was now unable to fight for what we had, because of the same fear that had kept us hidden in the shadows. I spent that evening studying commercial real estate in my penthouse while sipping a bottle of wine and using my laptop. Smaller towns in Tennessee, where 2 women could operate a business without causing controversies, and where romantic relationships weren't to be concealed or protected. However, courage is not something that can be purchased online. Additionally, by Tuesday morning, I was still alone myself in Nashville, witnessing the demise of my career, one missed appointment at a time. After Callie departed, 2 months later, I had become an expert at working alone. Walker's studio was losing money more quickly than I could keep up. Yet, I continued to come up every day to an empty appointment book because of my stubborn pride. The few remaining customers were bargain hunters as well as social misfits, women who had never had Nashville's approval in the first place and didn't care. They saved me from having to admit total failure, but their cash payments hardly paid for utilities. After the first month, I fired my receptionist. Couldn't defend the cost when there were typically no phone calls. I felt like I was being punished for every decision that had brought me to this point by the silence in my once buzzing salon. Pride comes before, Mrs. Henderson used to say, destruction. 3 weeks after Callie left town, she passed away, removing the one person who could have comprehended why I was ruining my life for love. Her burial, I had never felt so alone in my life after my divorce. A few distant family members, a few medical personnel the woman who had unintentionally introduced Callie into my life was no longer with me, and it wasn't even possible for me to express my gratitude to her. I began consuming wine earlier in the day, initially with dinner, then with lunch, and eventually substituting mimosas, which were primarily champagne, for morning coffee. The edges of failure were blunted by the booze and remorse, reducing the sense of a tomb in the deserted salon. Diana made one visit. In February, worried about the way I was looking. Her lunch was from a fancy restaurant, and Nashville women have mastered this type of subtle manipulation over many centuries. It's still possible to salvage. As she picked at her salad, she murmured this. Rachel has progressed to spreading rumors about another person's divorce. Individuals have short memory if you give them what they desire, which is to acknowledge your error, a little humility regarding being misled by someone who exploited your generosity, the implication of Callie's manipulation. My hands trembled with anger. Leave. Be sensible. Faith. You're damaging yourself because of someone who left you when things got tough. She went out to keep me safe. She knew this was only temporary, so she fled. You are not 18, but 48. Act as though you do. Following Diana's departure, she opened a bottle of wine and tossed her unfinished sandwich in the garbage. As the day turned into the evening, I managed to find Callie texted me from Memphis months ago, and I called that number. Voicemail was the first thing that appeared. A generic recording, her sweet voice gone. I called back right away after hanging up without leaving a message. This time, I spoke into nothingness. It's Faith. I need you to know something, even though I know you don't want to hear it. This wasn't momentary for me. It wasn't a midlife crisis or disorientation, as some have suggested. I cherish you. I need to have stated that when you were present, rather than allowing my fear to dictate my actions. I ought to have spoken up for you. I stopped. I'm more courageous now than I was when I was sober. I'm losing everything. In any case, the friends, the business, everything. As it happens, those items weren't worth retaining. If retaining them meant, I just thought you should know that I'm losing you, without much fanfare or expectation of rebirth. Spring arrived. My renewal of lease. There was a 50% rent increase with notice. The courteous manner in which the landlord evicted me. The majority of my gear would need to be sold to pay off obligations that I had been neglecting. I worked till midnight on the anniversary of our first kiss, counting brushes and styling products as if they were rosary beads, keeping track of inventories, and attempting to determine how much of a liquidation sale I could get my life back. After hours, the studio appeared different under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was smaller and more pitiful than the empire I had built over decades. All of that ambition and work came to a firm that would fail and be forgotten in a year. As I was closing up, I noticed a person I knew sitting on the bench on the other side of the road. My heart briefly froze, thinking it might be Callie, but it turned out to be simply another woman. It was more embarrassing than relieving to wait on the late bus. I spent the evening sitting in my, rather than wine, the penthouse had a bottle of bourbon. The more potent alcohol matched my resolve to at last feel something other than the gray apathy that has been my life's constant companion. I considered giving my sister in Atlanta a call, but Emma had to think for her own family. I considered contacting old acquaintances, but they had already taken their stances. The idea of contacting the crisis hotline crossed my mind. But what would I say? That I was mourning a connection that had persisted for 2 months, that I had ruined my life for a woman who didn't even pick up the phone. Rather, I called. Voicemail once more. It's me once more. Without you, it's day 87. But who's counting? My voice sounded coarser than usual because of the bourbon. Today, I sold the salon, agreed to sell it. Then, next is closing. Month, I felt you ought to be aware that your sacrifice was successful. I'm ruined. Officially, I gave a sour laugh. You are aware of what's amusing, to keep what I had safe. I built barriers for years. Additionally, I only felt truly alive when I was prepared to destroy them all for you. On a soggy March day, Mrs. Henderson's postponed memorial service took place. Mount Olivet Cemetery in the morning. After discovering dozens of patient sympathy notes, the hospital had planned it. She had made friends while undergoing therapy. About 15 people were gathered around her, including myself, who was standing beneath a black umbrella, modest headstone. While I considered second chances and regret, the priest talked about kindness and service. Faith. My heart stopped as I heard the voice behind me. Fearing that I was having hallucinations once more, I turned carefully. Callie was 10 feet tall, wearing the same cardigan she wore on the day we first met, and walking away. Now that her hair was shorter and more functional, she appeared thinner than I had recalled. But for 3 months, those emerald eyes were just as I had imagined. You came, I replied, whispered. The service went on all around us, but I said, she mattered to me. Too, could only think of the woman I had assumed was gone forever. The majority of people drifted off once the pastor ended, swiftly through the headstones, leaving us alone. I inquired, how did you know? The hospital made a call. As someone who was concerned about her, I had left my number. Against the rain, she adjusted her umbrella. I had no idea you would be here. It wouldn't have escaped my notice. Awkward quiet fell between us, 3 months apart, extending like a gap between us. She appeared more mature and solemn. The lightness with which I had fallen in love had been substituted by something more robust. Finally, I heard about the salon, she added. Nashville rumors spread quickly. I understand the significance that held for you. Therefore, I apologize. Did it? I've had 3 months to. I'm not sure I created that building for the appropriate reasons, now that I think about it. I closed my umbrella when the rain subsided. Empire building turns out to be a lonely job. What are you going to do now? Haven't. I made the decision to move away from Nashville completely and start fresh somewhere that is unaware of my past. Her face wavered. Where? A smaller town. Perhaps, somewhere too. I met her gaze directly, demonstrating that love doesn't have to be a source of scandals. Remain concealed. I understand that it's too little, too late, but I needed you to hear it. Faith. She looked down at her hands and said, I probably shouldn't have left. From me rather than voicemail messages. Received every single one of your letters. I simply wasn't sure how to reply. I didn't want you to stop calling, so you could have told me to stop. The only thing that made Memphis feel less like an exile was their voice, which was hardly heard. My breath caught. Then why? Because I was worried that you were just saying such things because you had lost everything else. Didn't you call me back? The charge hurt because it contained a grain of truth. But after you restored your life, you would recall why hiding was easier. The reality, I may have finally persuaded myself 3 months ago that losing her was worth restoring social. I answered, I've had plenty of time to rebuild. I had numerous proposals from individuals who wished to assist me in regaining the favor of society. I only needed to acknowledge that you were a mistake. It must have been satisfying to tell them to go to hell, since she nearly smiled for the first time since the cemetery. We began to stroll slowly toward the parking lot, neither of us wanting to end. This was the most honest I've been in years. An unplanned encounter. In the dreary afternoon light, the cemetery looked serene, with old trees softly dripping onto well-kept graves. When we arrived at her car, I murmured, I missed you. Every day. You do too. So why are we standing here behaving like strangers? Because I'm scared, she said, leaning against the door of her car and examining my face as if she were trying to remember it. Because it cost us both everything the last time I made the decision to love someone. Imagine if I told you that I don't give a damn about the price now. You might be deceiving yourself. In my opinion, I moved in closer, near enough to detect her perfume's well-known aroma. Could I prove it? How? Rather than responding, I cradled her face in my palms and gave her a kiss, as if I had been drowning for 3 months. And she was air. She instantly melted into me. Her hands digging into my coat after 3 months of desperate need overcame separation. When we eventually parted ways, we both were having trouble breathing. I said, come home with me. To her, come home with me. Faith. And let me to prove to you that you are worth every danger, something I should have done before, that the bravest thing I've ever done is to love you. She looked into my eyes to see the hesitation that had caused us to part ways. Previously, she didn't find it this time. All right, my penthouse was reached by car in separate vehicles, yet she was always visible in my rearview mirror. The uneasiness reappeared when we went upstairs. For a moment, too much pain, too much history. Before we lost our composure, I stated, I don't want to go back to hiding. I don't either. I want to sell this place and move to a new location where we can work together to create something. How is your life going? In this place, it's not a life. An empty mansion surrounded by pricey surroundings is all that's there. She made her way to the windows that looked out at the city lights. I cherished you in your salon, in this apartment, in your complex world of Nashville. The past tense. She faced me once again. Not at all. Present, nervous, life-altering, annoying, and terrifying. The present tense, I drew her into my arms as I crossed the room. When we made love this time, it was like returning home and embarking on a new journey all at once. She muttered, my name like a prayer, and in response, I demonstrated to her how much 3 months apart had taught me what was important. Later, we lay entangled in my pricey sheets, making plans for an idle future. With Nashville's consent, she traced patterns of laziness and said, where should we go? On my body. We can be normal somewhere with mountains and people going about their daily lives. Talk for yourself. No matter where you go, you're exceptional. She laughed, and the sound was, after months of silence, like music. 18 months later, I stood in the doorway of watching Callie complete our newest client at Bell & Walker Studios. The tiny alpine village of Gatlinburg had been dubious about 2 Nashville ladies starting a hair salon, but consistent labor and reasonable costs had gained the favor of the majority of the community. Our store was smaller than Walker's studio, sandwiched between a cafe. We'd painted a roastery and a used bookshop on the main street, but it felt more authentic than anything I'd ever constructed. The walls ourselves used locally produced artwork rather than pricey images, and stocked the room with plants that Callie cared for, similar to kids. Mrs. As our client appreciated her new haircut, I remarked, Callie, Patton looks 20 years younger, just needed someone to see her properly. Callie answered in the mirror, assisting the older woman with her coat. Following Mrs. Patterson's departure, we started our closure procedures. After 18 months of work, had established a relaxed routine of cooperative work and cozy quiet. Yet tonight felt different in some way. More charged. What's on your mind? I was staring when Callie questioned. How much has changed? A positive or negative change? Shift. She leaned back against me as I approached and put my arms around her waist, saying, it was the best change of my life. And I inhaled her hair's familiar aroma. We had gradually developed a friendship based on trust, via everyday decisions to put one another before fear. Faith, she muttered, there's something I want to ask you. Before I could respond, she turned in my arms and pulled a small velvet box from her pocket. My heart ceased. I am aware that we agreed to take our time. I am aware that this is the first time that we have ever been in a relationship like this. She opened the package with trembling hands and saw 2 plain silver bands. But I also know I don't want to pay. Callie, they aren't engagement rings. They're promise rings. Another day without dedication to this life we've created. Rings, a pledge to stick by each other through difficult times and to create a lifelong relationship. Gazed at the rings and then back at her green eyes, which were now filled with unshed tears. I said more than I believe that one could love another. Is that true? That's a hell. Yes. The silver was warm when she put the smaller ring on my finger and extended her hand for me to follow suit, against her flesh, and I reflected on how this moment differed from my wedding day 20 years prior. There was no chapel full of individuals we hardly knew, no gown that was more expensive than the average person's monthly salary, and just two women making vows in. There's something else, Callie replied, reaching into a tiny store that had a hair product odor. She took 2 keys out of her other pocket and said, I got us something to celebrate our new beginning, connected to a house-shaped keychain. You purchased a home for us. I made a down payment on the tiny blue home on. We pass Maple Street every morning. It needs some maintenance. But I believed we could fix it together. I was overwhelmed as I glanced at the keys. I had lived in a penthouse that screamed in Nashville, achievement, but it never felt like home. Callie described a cottage with a wraparound porch, a garden full of wild. How did you afford a house deposit? Flowers, and neighbors who waved rather than gossiped. I've been keeping all of my coin from the store, and the cottage might have served as collateral for a little loan. She chewed her lip anxiously. Hopefully, that's all right. Instead of responding, I wanted to surprise you. We gave her a passionate, fervent kiss, full of appreciation for this woman who had regained her ability to dream. Broke apart. We were both crying. I replied, You taught me how to build a home. I spent so many years building walls. Instead, we taught one another. I reflected on the letter I'd written as we closed up the store and made our way home. Obtained from Diana the previous week. With Nashville society ablaze with a fresh scandal, my name had finally fading from their chats. She had told me that some of my old clients had inquired about me, wanting to know if I had tossed the letter away without replying. But I could think about going back. The porch light of the small cottage at the end of Maple Street was blazing yellow in the darkness of the evening. Callie had already created a garden in the backyard and established a small workshop for refinishing furniture in the garage, discovered at estate auctions. It wasn't glitzy or spectacular. Our neighbors were retirees, mechanics, and teachers, rather than socialites and country music executives. The most thrilling entertainment was the monthly potluck at the community center. However, when Callie greeted me with a grin over coffee in the morning and reached for my hand in the evening, walks, and I felt wealthier than ever when she dozed off with her head resting on my shoulder as we viewed vintage films, my penthouse in Nashville. Any regrets? As we upped the cottage steps together, she questioned, and I gazed at the assurance. I responded, Only one, and then I looked at the woman who taught me that love was worth every danger. What is it? She unlocked our front door, dragged me inside, and I followed her into the life that it had taken me 48 years to find. We both chose the life where 2 women could create a permanent relationship and where love didn't have to lurk in the shadows, where regular days felt spectacular when you were living them with the proper attitude, without feeling guilty about it. Observing Callie hang her keys beside the door, I came to the realization that this was the true definition of happiness, the glitzy success I'd sought for decades, but the peaceful satisfaction of being completely recognized and we had discovered our role in the world, and more significantly, we had discovered one another.